In this lesson, we will dynamically parent the head to the chest. So the first thing we'll want to do is create a group for our head control. That way, any connections we need to create can be tied to that group, and we can still freely animate the head. Alright, so with it selected, we can right-click and grab the group tool. Let's go ahead and rename this group to head control underscore grp01. Okay, we'll want to open our group. Let's make sure it's stored in our hidden layer. Alright, great. So from there, we're going to want to adjust the pivot on this group. Let's go ahead and grab the hierarchy panel, choose effect pivot only. And we want the pivot to be right on top of the chest. So let's go ahead and press Shift A and align it there. Alright, great. So as the chest starts to rotate, we'll get the right control we need. We'll make sure that it will drive the head control properly. Let's go ahead and freeze transforms on our group object. We'll alt right click and choose freeze transform. Now, we'll need to do the same thing for our head control. Take a look. If we were to go ahead and use transform to 0 on the head control, you'll notice that the head bone shifts because we have changed the pivot of its group. So I'll go ahead and undo that back, and with the head selected, we'll alt right click and again freeze its transforms, and then we'll check on its axis order just to make sure it's set back to ZXY. Alright, so now we need to figure out a way to constrain our group. We can safely go in and constrain it to our chest control, but the problem is what happens when we turn off the constraint. We know that we have linked the head to our center of gravity, and that's what the current parent still is. However, when we start to move the center of gravity, we might notice that the head shifts slightly away from where it needs to be. So what we could do then is create an intermediate object that we constrain against, so that when we turn our constraint off on the chest, it will be constrained to that object that is linked back to our center of gravity control. That way the pivoting will work successfully. So let's go ahead and create that object. We could always work with a helper. We use a point helper. Let's make this a cross. Let's go ahead and add it to the scene. And what we'll do is go ahead and align this to our center of gravity control. So we'll use Alt-A and click on the center of gravity. Now with this, we want to align in position as well as orientation. So let's make sure orientation is checked as well and choose OK. And now we'll go ahead and quick align this helper over to our chest bone to make sure it's in the correct spot, right where the group's pivot is. I'd like to go ahead and increase the size of the helper, let's say to about 20. It's going to work out very well. And we'll go ahead and rename this to PT DRV, since it will drive our head control, followed by an underscore head control underscore COG, so we know what it's tied to, and we'll add a 01. Let's make sure that this is going to be stored in the hidden layer. And let's also make sure that this will be linked to our center of gravity. Alright, great. So now we are ready to set up our constraints. So here's how we'll do this. We'll first make sure to constrain to the chest control. That way when we set our weight to 1, that means the chest will work. So when we go ahead and turn on our Boolean switch, that means again, the chest control's weight is active. When we turn it off, we will then look at the weight of the center of gravity. And we'll need to do something slightly different to our expression to make sure that this works correctly. So this is going to be really neat. Let's go ahead and work on constraining this object. So we'll go ahead and create on, let's say, the head control, a custom parameter that we can use to turn the weight on and off. So with the head control selected, not the group, let's check to make sure we have the right object selected. We'll go ahead and add an attribute holder. and we will rename this to extra controls. We'll now press Alt-1, and we'll go ahead and create a Boolean channel. All right, let's go ahead and name this follow chest. When we hit enter, we can take a look at the size of our parameter. We might want to increase the width to 100. Let's go ahead and see what that does. That's going to work out very well. Let's go ahead and now add this channel. Great. So now we can go ahead and work on setting up our constraints and then tying the weight of those constraints to this channel. Let's go ahead and select the chest, or excuse me, the group. We'll Alt-right click and grab our position constraint, and we'll tie that to the chest. Let's go ahead and Alt-right click again. We'll choose our position constraint and tie this to our helper. All right, great. Let's go ahead and take care of the orientation now. We'll Alt-right click, choose our orientation constraint, tie that to the chest. Orientation constraint, tie that to our helper. Beautiful. So there's no shifting. Everything's working great. And now it's time to connect everything to our custom channel. So this is going to be really straightforward. Let's go ahead and grab our head control. Just go back to the modify panel so we can keep track of our custom channel there. But with the head control selected, we'll right click and choose wire parameters. That's going to be modified object, extra controls, and we'll grab follow chest. And we'll go ahead and click on our group object that has the constraint. So it's going to be transform, position, position constraint, and here is the first weight that's tied to our chest control. So this is really straightforward. The first connection here is a direct connection, so we'll use the lower arrow and choose connect. Now, here's what's tricky. We need to make sure that the weight of the center of gravity, or this intermediate object here, we need to make sure that the weight goes in reverse so that when we are at 1 with the chest control, this weight is set to 0 and vice versa. So this is actually really simple. If we were to go ahead and just tie this in, if we were to just go ahead and choose connect, what this means is that right now both weights are set to 0. So we need to do simple math and say, all right, if we go ahead and subtract this by 1, well, that means that if we are set to 0 here, that means that this channel will be set to 1. But once we're set to 1 here, once this is active, that means that this channel will be actually set to 0. So right in front of follow chest, we'll go ahead and add 1 minus. All right, so now if we were to update this, the position is going to work just fine. Let's go ahead and finish this by working on the orientation constraint, and then we'll go ahead and test this out. So we're just about done. We can go ahead and find the group's orientation constraint from here. I'll just go ahead and expand the wire parameter dialog. Okay, so from there's the rotation list, and there is the orientation constraint. We'll grab weight 1. Let's go ahead and tie that into the follow chest parameter. And when I'm referring to weight 1, I'm actually referring to this first weight channel, which is weight 0. So with max, 0 represents 1, 1 represents 2. So just for clarity. All right, so now when we get to weight 2, we know that we need to add 1 minus the channel before we go ahead and connect this. So once we have connected this, after that's been updated, now we can go ahead and test this out. Let's go ahead and close this. If we were to go ahead and take the chest, you'll see that the head control is not going to move because the weight is off. It's exactly what we want. If we were to go to our move tool and start to move the chest, again, it's going to stay put. However, if we were to go back to our head control and go ahead and turn on the follow chest switch, now you'll notice that, yes, the chest will drive the head. Very exciting. We can go to our move tool and take a look at that as well. Great. If we were to go to the center of gravity and start to move that, you could see the head is going to follow properly. Now watch what happens when we go to our follow chest switch and turn that off. You can see because of that helper, it's going to still cause the head to follow the upper body exactly the way it should. Very exciting. So we've learned how to create a dynamic parent system in 3ds Max. Now, the next challenge is to make sure that the twist control will work properly when we tie in the flexi line to the neck. So that's going to be another really fun topic. In the next lesson, we are ready to work on the next flexi line.